Welcome to Planetary Health First, Mars Next. It is an amazing day. We have some super amazing guests today. Jack and Tom. Sounds like a drink, but no, it is something about magic coming here today. We have Jack from the payer side and Tom from the vendor side. And we're going to have some good conversations today. And we're just going to be talking about adding value in healthcare. And so the first thing we want to do is Jack, how have you in your career, Jack, brought value to internal customers and business units? Tell me about that.
Well, from the sourcing perspective, right, it's really important, I think, to do your due diligence, right? It's a lot of pre-work, right? You know, I think oftentimes in our seat, we're being pushed to kind of just get that next vendor in the door. Right. And I think you kind of sometimes have to slow it down. You know, you really need to look at, it can't always be the cost pressures, right? It can't always be that. It has to be more of a long-term partnership. It has to be where you thoroughly vet through, and it doesn't have to be an RFP or an RFI, right? It just have to do the legwork, the front end legwork, which is super important to not only, you're not only finding the right vendor, right? But you're finding the right vendor for the right plan, for the right strategy, right? You can't just be like, hey, this vendor is like, hey, I can throw you a 3-to-1 ROI. And you're like, okay, great. Well, the market may yield a 5, 6, 7-to-1 ROI, right? So don't take the 3-to-1. Do the research, look into it, and figure out, what's how to align that vendor with what your strategic priorities are as a plan. And I think that if you keep that in mind, that's a big first step.
So, Tom, what have you seen after partnering with sourcing and procurement teams?
It's been a wild ride in my career. So I started off selling insurance on the broker side, supporting on the health plan side of the fence, and then jumped to the dark side a little over a decade ago. And it's been interesting. So I started out in the MRR world, the HEDIS, risk adjusted vendor side, and I've been through hundreds of RFPs on the as a vendor. And then I was lucky enough to get into the consulting side as well, and then represent the health plan. And it's interesting to be on both sides of the fence. And I think sometimes you will have sourcing teams and procurement teams at a health plan, and they're just given the selection by their downstream business units. And then other times you've got, I think, folks like Jack and some other more strategic sourcing leaders will be able to look long term and be a visionary and help a health plan who's often struggling, looking at their toes and taking baby steps over, the big hurdles and headwinds that they're facing, and plan long term. And that's a challenge, I think, for any organization, but definitely in this complex managed care world we operate in. So I think from being on the vendor side, it's challenging, especially post-COVID now. I mean, we used to do on-sites all the time. You work your way down to a finalist selection, and nowadays it's all done virtually and crossing paths at conferences. And it's definitely been challenging. But when you can find the right team internally at a health plan who has that long-term mindset and scope, you can really accomplish a lot together.
Well, that's awesome. I would love to hear from you guys together. We know about all those headwinds, all the challenges coming, and regulatory, financial constraints, and geez, I'm not even going to get on about the change, healthcare incidents. But tell me about what you're seeing right now and how you guys are dealing with these things. Well, if you want to, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I can start first. I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize here, right? But changes in healthcare is not like a new concept, right? We're constantly evolving. I mean, we've all been in it for a while. And I think if you don't maintain a certain level of flexibility or understanding about the market, right, then you might as well, I mean, I don't want to say give it up, but you're not going to get the outcomes that you really want, right? So I think kind of it goes back to your individual plan, right? And what your needs are, establishing those long-term partnerships, like Tom said. A lot of times I think what happens is when you don't have a plan and you don't have a strategy, right? You're just taking the first thing in the door, right? And that's not a good long-term solution. It's not a good long-term solution, I would say, even for life, right? I mean, just in general, nobody just takes if you take the first guy that comes over and says he's going to, build you a new roof, you're probably going to get, raked over the coals, right? I mean, it's just like anything else. So, there's a lot of things going on, right? And it's really good to stay informed and to be flexible. But you always, I think for us, keeping like your eye on what the pain points are at the plan and really focusing on those, I think really kind of more or less but reduces your risk quite a bit, right, for all these changes. I mean, definitely when it comes to compliance and regulatory issues, you have to be able to be flexible. You got to adhere to whatever government payer standards that you are obligated to adhere to. But from a strategy perspective and a success perspective, a lot of things don't change, right? It's about making the member happy, right? It's about driving them to be better about self-care, managing their conditions better. It's about retention, member retention. Like, how do you provide them the best service so that you can navigate the waters a little bit better, right? If you have that group, if you have happy members, then you're probably going to navigate those waters a little bit better.
Tom?
Yeah, amen. I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning. There's always been some state of turmoil and challenge. I think I've been on an average of 15 conferences every single year, risk adjustment, quality, clinical focused, going back a decade now. And it seems like every year there's something new. There's a shiny object, the closest crocodile to your canoe I heard recently, I really like. There's always something that has the leadership's focus and the team's focus on overcoming that immediate hurdle, like I mentioned earlier, kind of staring at your toes. And so if you think about the stars and quality gut punch everyone received post-COVID bubble, that was painful. You've got the V24 to 28 risk adjustment model, and risk adjustment just can't save the day anymore. So you got the utilization runaway. A lot of articles coming out from Q3, Q4, an increase in healthcare utilization that wasn't planned for. So you start adding in like the health equity index and the replacement via of the reward factor. The supplemental benefit changes now, the requirements around reporting, and there's a giant magnifying glass over the doubling of spend from Medicare to managed care organizations. It doubled in the last 5 years, the spend around supplemental benefits. So they're coming back and, they want fine detail reporting that's really, really challenging, that isn't as cut and dry for, traditionally what the encounter data submission process has always been about. And then you throw in the digital quality transformation where health plans, CMS and NCQA did dip their toes in the water this last year. And slowly, hopefully over the next 5-6 years, we'll have the infrastructure from a data standpoint of a standardization that I think will really help accomplish a lot. But those are some of the key headwinds and themes that I've seen that a lot of health plans are focused on. And there's a big challenge, a big headwind, but it's always been there. I mean, I think back to when the RAD-V first came out, and everyone was throwing their hands up about how do I need to find a new industry to get into? Like, this is overly challenging. And what came out of that was I think in retrospect really impressive, because everyone had a heightened sense of concern around it. But what it did is from leadership down, there was major concentration and effort and focus on compliance programs, accurate risk adjustment programs, the investment in those risk teams, the investment in those vendors, the scrutiny on the vendors. So if you think about what happened with RAD-V and the regulatory guidance and changes that came, long-term, it was best for the health plans financially. And more importantly, it was better for the members that they were serving. So if you think about these headwinds that come in, if you can find the right strategic sourcing partner and vendors that help you look longer term for where this is going, it's really, really important. And that's challenging to do, especially when the financial state that a lot of folks are in right now, and a lot of uncertainty. So if you can find a way to strap on with the right leaders and team members internally to figure out where these regulatory changes are taking us. And consultants are great. There's a number of great consultants in our space that are really helping plans plan strategically long term.
Yeah, I was thinking too, never mind all the legislative changes, right? And the Medicaid funding that's being reduced, and, us, I mean, on the plan side, we have to worry about redeterminations and where those members are going to be going. And now they're going to collect a premium and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, yeah, I mean, never mind all of that, right? Along with all the other regulatory issues. I was just thinking as you were talking that, I mean, you're talking about 50 plus Medicaid states potentially, right? Plans, and how do you synthesize all of them together too, right? And that's a huge challenge.
And then you don't even have to deal with California. Is not even that's another country, right?
Well, we have a lot of different countries in our country.
All right. Well, let's move on to this other topic. Like, how do you understand whether a vendor partnership or program is really working, whether it's making sense? Like, how do you define that success? Can you tell us more about that?
Hey, you want me to take it, or?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
All right. This is like a huge answer, right? I mean, I'll try to whittle it down as much as possible, right? But how do you define success in your partnerships? I mean, I think it goes back to how well how good your data is internally, right? So if you have really good data as a plan, and I know this may sound really obvious, but if you can take that data and synthesize it down to the 3 to 5 strategic items that you need to work on, whatever those are, whether it's kit vendors and quality, whether it's, like Tom's had a new RADV platform, or, something, anything, right? It could be anything that you feel like you're not succeeding in as a plan. If you can really focus on those areas, and I think when you focus on those areas, this is a marathon, right? This is not a sprint ever in the health plan space, right? But if you can focus on those areas where you have good data, you can validate it internally, and then you can set yourself up for success. And I hate to take this laissez-faire attitude with vendors, but sometimes, I'm very, very transparent right from the beginning. Like, this is what we need as a plan. This is the price we need it at. And this is the kind of partnership we're looking for. And we expect you to be held to these performance standards. If you come out of the gate with that, I think my experience is that I've had really good response from a lot of vendors. I think they just want to know. Like, I mean, to be honest, like, don't be tiptoeing around and giving them half information, and like, what are your goals as a plan, right? And I think if you can do that, you're setting yourself up for success later. So be transparent from the beginning. Give them what you need. Now, we all know there's negotiation that exists, right? You can't say what I need is exactly kind of, everything I need. I mean, everyone knows this is a little game, a little dance that's always played, but you do have to be pretty transparent right from the beginning. And I think that what happens is success can be defined in a bunch of ways, right? So it can be that engagement, right? Whether that engagement's outcome is member retention, right? Our current member retention is, let's say, 10%. We want to get to 20%. You tell a vendor, I need to get to 20%. That simple, right? Can you do it? Can you not do it? It's only business. Take out the emotion, right? If that vendor feels like they can do that and they're willing to kind of take some risk on that contract, right? Because they're the one actually performing the services. With a little caveat, as a plan, you can't handcuff vendors either, right? You can't tell them, oh, you can only do X a part of this process, and we're still going to hold you accountable for it, right? It's kind of like a turnkey approach, right? If you're going to take on financial risk, then you should probably have control over the process. I think that's only fair. So I think a lot of those elements, right? That's one big success driver, right? Is those performance metrics. The other is not just flipping vendors out just at the turn of a hat, right? I mean, we spent a lot of money. A lot of plans spend a lot of money on implementation duties, right? And those tasks related to that. If you're flipping out vendors every year or two, your project management teams and all these people are just spending tons of time and resources on, implementing that new vendor. And for what? It's kind of a shot in the dark, sometimes, right? It's the devil, sometimes, right? I think I define success as when we can work with a vendor on a problem and fix it long term, rather than the vendor has a problem, let's just terminate them. And then sourcing has to go through a new RFP, and we have to go through new implementations, and we have to request funding, and we have, the budget may not be the same, and you may get a price break, but then your performance is crap, right? So I think there's a lot of key elements there that when you say success and partnerships, like it's multidimensional, definitely.
My mind immediately went to, I was having a conversation with my father not too long ago, and it was around failure and what should happen next. And Jack, my mind immediately went to, do you let go of a vendor where you've spent so much time and effort in fostering a relationship? And I think about Microsoft when they came out with that operating system, 15 years ago. My dad's been in the IT consulting space a while, and he was, had a hand in this. And the CEO of Microsoft went to the leader and they found out that operating system was going to fall apart. Billions of dollars invested into it, and he was prepared to be fired. And he was, why would I do that? Why would I let you go? I've invested so much into you thus far. Fix it, and let's work on this together long term. And I think 99% of people would assume for that much of a financial loss and risk to that organization, he was able to have that long-term mindset of what that asset really was. So I think I totally hear you on that front. And on the ROI, it's a numbers game nowadays too. And if you think post-COVID, there's been there were a lot of, learn in college the term laggard, someone who's late to the game, someone who traditional mindset. There's a lot of health plans that way. They're operating with leaders that have been there 30, 40 years in some of the executive chairs, right? And so they never really jumped on board with the digital health approach, right? And so then everyone had to take that blind leap of faith that was a little slow to the game when COVID took place. And from a contracting standpoint, it was tough for a lot of those health plans that had never been through that process before. And so a lot of vendors, I don't want to say took advantage, but there were some contracts that were pretty brutal, and you learn the hard way. And as a procurement and sourcing leader, Jack, you've probably done thousands of contracts in your career. Those are lessons that are learned the hard way. And then, contract after contract, you're thinking of how you build up the teeth from an SLA and a KPI standpoint, and holding that vendor to the fire and doing what they came in and pitched they said they could do. That's a real challenge. I'm curious your thoughts on, how you would track success and around SLAs, maybe a couple experiences you had in past lives around what that looked like.
Yeah, I think when you talk about SLAs, KPIs, whatever terminology you want to use, I mean, I have my own thoughts on that, of course. But I think, personally, this is, I'm not saying this is like the end all be all. This is, but I think it's all about behavior change and, successes, right? So if you're experiencing this and you want to get to here with the vendor, right? Do you throw 100 SLAs at them, right? And then what that does is it balloons their admin costs. They pass that along to you. There's no doubt about it. They're passing that along to you. They send 100 reports a month. We don't have people internally that can always review them or timely review them so that you can react appropriately. I'm much more in favor of strategic KPIs and more strategic kind of, performance measures that one, I always say there's few things like don't bite off more than you can chew. Find out which are the 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever number that is, number of SLAs or KPIs that you can manage internally, right? Which ones are going to be the most impactful, and then actually measure them, and you can independently validate them on your side, right? Don't just, no offense to the vendor side, but don't just take the vendor's word for it and you can't validate it, but that happens all the time. I've seen it in many places. So just have less, right? Once you have less and you can validate that internally, independently, then you can hold the vendor accountable, provide them the data where they're failing. That changes their behavior, right? I mean, that's ultimately what you want to get out of it, right? It's a motivator. So as much as the price is a motivator and, you're getting, I like unique contract structures, right? Where there's upside downside, there's shared savings, there's um, performance-based stuff, right? Where if you're talking about quality, for example, we're at 10% gap closure this year. We want to get to 20, or we want to be best in class for colorectal kits. We want to be at 28 or 30%, right? There's plenty of vendors that come in and be like, I can hit 40, I can hit 45. But then when you kind of back up and you start getting into contract negotiations, they're like, well, that was for the commercial side of business. So really it's like 10%. And you're like, well, you just sold me on 40. So, we're going to have to find some middle ground. We're already at 10%, right? We don't need 10%. So, I mean, if you're willing to say 100% of your fees at risk at 10%, sure, we'll probably take that, but we'll give you a bonus at like 20% or something like that. But I mean, it's all kind of what levers to pull and push, right? I mean, that's really what it's about. And I think keeping your KPIs and you're low, right, and focused and really targeted to the most impactful areas, I think that goes a long way. And then, once you kind of lock those down, right, and you get performance on those three, maybe the next year you amend and you improve your, you bump your KPIs up. Maybe you give a vendor a 3-year contract instead of a 1-year contract, right? And you do year-over-year performance improvement targets. So this year you're at 15. Next year we expect 17. The following year we expect 20, right? I mean, that's, you can do that. Vendors love long-term contracts, right? They know that they have revenue coming in. They don't have to worry about going out and selling more. It should be a very mutually beneficial relationship is what it should be. That's where, that's fortunately, I think, where the rubber hits the road. And I think why I have pretty decent relationships with a lot of vendors is because of that. If we're winning, that's great. If you're winning, that's great. If we're both winning, that's the best possible option. So, because I think in those cases, it ultimately goes back to the member and the member wins. Right.
Amen. Yeah, the exclusionary logic within ROI methodologies I've always found really interesting. And to your point, you have to do your due diligence as a health plan as well. And I'm curious your thoughts if you've preferred to come to agreement on that ROI methodology early, or is that something you put into the contract that you come to agreement on later? Because that's a big sticking point, right? You think about the engagement. It's a numbers game. How many folks are actually going to leverage this solution or platform or widget or whatever it may be? And you're hearing some health plans, internal teams. So just like a diabetes front, for example, in my past life, we're engaging 50% of the people, but then you actually look at their logic and they're excluding people with bad phone numbers. They're excluding people that they made 3 attempts to. I mean, this is vendor side and plan side. Both are, not guilty, but they take part in interesting methodologies. So I'm curious, from your front, do you like to agree to those or, lock those down ahead of time? Or if it's a vendor you trust and you'll come to agreement on long term, you leave that through the implementation process?
I don't want to give you the political answer here of it depends, right? But I think if I had to choose one way or the other, I'd say locking it down early is better. It goes back to the kind of the due diligence fact on any vendor selection, right? The more work you do on the front end, I think the better outcomes you get on the back end, the better it is to manage. It's easier. It's more transparent. It's clear. Like everyone's on the same page, right? I don't know how often, I mean, obviously in past life, there's been times, like you said, where you get into something and you think you have it locked down and then stuff changes, right? Maybe there's one member that throws the ROI like way off, one member cost, right? That's happened. And that was a shared savings model, right? Where if it was over 2-to-1 ROI, they get more, and if it was under, they get less. And that one member threw them under, and they argued there was one member, so it should be excluded, right? So it's like, I don't know. I think locking it down as much as possible, but also being, it's like you said that if is it a vendor partner that you trust, right? That where after the fact, can you work through some of those issues too, right? In case they come up, because as much as you try to control everything, there's always something. There's almost always something. I mean, but I think in early engagement, like I think giving a vendor access to claims, for example. I mean, if that's the strategy, or if they have that tolerance level at the plan, I think you end up getting a better solution. At least they get a better target on the front end of that contract, rather than kind of being a guess, right, based on industry trends and things like that. I mean, so It's tough, but it's I think more often than not, it's always better to do legwork on the front end and kind of get it locked in.
Well, we hear innovation everywhere, the buzzword of everything. But where are you guys finding or seeing meaningful innovation?
That's a great question. Like you said, it is a overused buzzword. I think it's funny. When we were talking about this question earlier, I was thinking about how innovation means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? And when I think of innovation, I think of successes that we can leverage long term, right? I think of vendors that are maybe backed by a venture firm, right? That just wants to get their foot in the door. Maybe it's a new process, maybe it's a new technology. I think in healthcare, with it evolving as rapidly as it is, I think you have to keep your mind open to everything new. To be a sourcing person and to think that you got all the answers is really a bad place to be, right? Like, hey, here are our vendors. We're going to ride them out, and we're going to ride them out for the next 5-10 years. We're never going to reevaluate the contract. We're never going to reevaluate the market, right? I mean, the process is X, Y, Z, and this is always the way it's been. And there's this other vendor that's saying, hey, we should probably look at it a little bit different way. And to shut them down immediately just because they're like a Series A or B type venture-backed company I think is foolish. Now, that doesn't mean we don't continue to do the due diligence. And if they have venture money, that doesn't mean that we tell them, well, use your venture money to fund this project, right? I've been playing around with a lot of different kinds of contract structures there too in innovation, right? Plans are very risk averse. Right. Very risk averse. They don't want to jump in with a vendor that doesn't have a proven track record. And I get that. I completely get it. But there's a lot you can contract out with your risk too. Right. If a vendor and a Series A or B vendor is willing to throw money at a project and they just want to be a partner and they want to co-develop, I think we entertain it. There's no doubt about it. We entertain it. It could be a sister company in the long run, right? It could be, they could develop an entire process around that plan and that membership. I just think, I think you just got to keep your mind open to innovation. And I think that, and it's not just the brand new ideas that come out too, right? There's a lot of R&D out there in existing companies that's happening. And I think you have to give your existing vendors an opportunity to give them time, don't just say, hey, this is the process we do, and this is the scope that you guys do for us. I think you have to hear about what else they're doing in the space, right? What else they're developing. Because that's the best case scenario, right? If an existing partner that you like and is doing a good job comes up with yet another, innovative way to do something or a tangential scope, you don't have to do an NDA, you don't have to do a new BAA, you don't have to do an MSA. Like the streamlining to the contract becomes, a huge factor in that. And, they're already a good partner, right? So you already have established relationships. You already have, how many kids they have and, all the personal stuff, right? It becomes, it's just, I think like you said, it's overused, but it's not. It's underutilized is what I think it is. It's overused, but underutilized. Does that make sense? Like the term is overused, but the actual how we implement them and how we use them is not as fruitful as I would like to see.
I completely agree. I heard someone speak on stage last year about innovation, and it's not always something that's brand new or something sexy or shiny. It doesn't have to be. A lot of times it's something on the back end that's hidden, that's not plastered all over LinkedIn. It's finding a way to enhance processes or just leveraging something that's existing in a new way, as was the overall thesis of the speech. And I couldn't agree more. Now, I know we're not here to talk about Duos, but I think how we as a company approach innovation and how we as a B2C organization, right, improving and enhancing a member experience, we've really innovated in the way in which we bring benefits and solutions and options forward to a member to help them get self-sufficient. And it's really surprising that no one had approached it this way, but the way we prioritize and built our entire platform and our member engagement approach to optimize that experience for that member in a way that was never done before. Like, all the pieces have been in the industry, call it Medicaid redetermination or SNAP and EBT enrollment, or the whole long laundry list of things we do. But it's never been combined into one solution or one approach before. And I think that's a really great example. There's hundreds of them out there, but a lot of times it's not the shiniest thing that has, an executive or someone, pretty jazzed up about it.
One more thing about that, though, too, is I was just thinking, as a leader in the sourcing area, right, I have people that work for me that are sourcing managers or they're sourcing specialists or whatever. And just exposing them to a lot of the innovation in the space too gets them thinking and builds their business acumen too, right? So that they become more analytical, they understand the market better. And I think that gives them a more well-rounded view long-term for vendor selection, vendor process, even being a real true collaborator with your internal business partners, right? If you can bring a new vendor for them to look at, even if they don't contract with them, even if they don't, they've learned something new about how to maybe we build it internally. I'm not saying we're stealing ideas, right? It's more just like, hey, we never thought of it this way. It's just, getting out there and educating yourself. More often than not, we're not building it internally, but those are options.
It happens all the time. And one more quick thing, Michael. As a vendor that represented several large vendors, very large contracts with sizable health plans, I can't tell you how many times it had been 2, 3, 4 years since that vendor had presented to the leadership team or even the operational owners of what they are doing, the changes they've made. They're just living within that contract. And it's like, wait, how long has it been? And so that's, to your point, I want to hammer home. It's really important to the RFI as a vendor. I can't tell you how many I get, and they're like, it's another fact-finding mission. But really, no, they're just scanning for innovation. And if you could bring something forward with some meaningful innovation, even your existing partners, include your existing vendors in those RFIs. Because I can't tell you how many times I've taken part in an RFP, and you could tell the way the RFP was written. The sourcing person or the end business unit who owned writing that document was laser focused on, I need this thing to do this thing, and there's brackets around it, right? And so, take part in more RFIs, be more open to hearing a vendor's approach outside of the norm, because that's where a lot of that secret innovation lies.
Yeah.
So what about the future of supplemental benefits?
I could
Tom?
Yeah. So,
go ahead. I'll let you. That's your bread and butter.
Yeah.
Well, sort of.
No pun intended, right? Bread and butter. Anyway.
Yeah. There's a lot of headlines and a lot of traffic around supplemental benefits. I mentioned it earlier. Medicare doubled the spend per member annually on supplemental benefits, and we're in a fact-finding expedition right now. And so you think about what I was talking earlier about. Why is the guidance coming down the pipe? Why are we being forced to have new Part C and Part D reporting requirements, right? And it's and specifically last year, CMS came out and said that supplemental benefits have to have a reasonable expectation in improving health outcomes. And that's really challenging, especially when you've got some health plans out there, right? You got Silver Sneaker or gym memberships, and a lot of your homeless population, they're using it to shower, right? And so how do you track utilization? And so doing that through an encounter data submission historical process that wasn't capable of handling that data in a standardized way that made any sense at all. We've got a real challenge ahead of us from a supplemental benefit standpoint, right? And it was the GOA, I believe it was, the Government Accountability Office, just on January 23rd came out with a really long and nice report around there's a need for greater transparency around supplemental benefits. And why? And it's because there is hundreds of millions, likely billions of dollars being invested in SDOH, in solving for a lot of these needs. And what is working? What isn't working? Who are the members that are actually utilizing these benefits, right? And then you have a whole the malicious marketing component, right? And so health plans a lot of times point fingers down at brokers, but you're seeing these advertisements in Florida, Jack, right, around we'll pay your car insurance if you come and switch over to us. And so no blame game here, but it's there's a revolution happening around supplemental benefits, how they can be marketed, how they're tracked, to the reporting now, and where we are, I think, as an industry and from a regulatory body, is looking at what's working, what's not working. And then maybe there was a large health plan on stage last year who I asked a question specifically. You've been in the product leader, you've been in the supplemental benefit game for 20 years. If you had a magic wand, what would you expect to happen in the future? And his response I found pretty interesting, is that there's likely going to be a utilization requirement threshold for certain types of benefits. And I think it makes sense, right? If you're marketing something and 0.00004% of your population is actually utilizing it, should it be used as a marketing apparatus, or should we be flipping this entire, that specific component on its head and finding a way to measure are those members that are in desperate need getting the help that they need? And if not, what do we need to switch? So it's an investigative approach. I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see some major changes come out on supplemental benefits.
Well, I mean, and from the plan side, right, getting utilization thresholds would be great, right? Because, if we're spending the money, right, and especially a lot of these are PM contracts, right? So you're spending it across the board on your entire membership, and you're getting no utilization on it. I just think it's a double-edged sword, right? Because they're doing it to attract membership, right? But at the same time, they're not utilizing it. So it may sound like the greatest idea in the world, but then when the rubber meets the road, it's not happening. Like, they're not adopting. So it's like the difference between concept and operationalization of it, right? I mean, is it really performing the way you intended it to perform? And I'll be honest, like, I've worked with a lot of product people in the past, and that their focus is not on how it rolls out, how people are utilizing it. Their focus is to offer a cool new benefit that nobody else offers, and to attract members. I mean, the name of the game, health insurance, is volume, right? Numbers. So the more people you get in the door, the better. And I think we have a role in that in sourcing, right? Is to work with product really closely. In my past, we've gotten stuff thrown at us. We decided to do, I don't know, just some random idea. I don't want to give a hint as to what plan I'm referring to when they say they offered this benefit, right? And our first reaction on the sourcing side was, how do you expect me to contract that, right? I mean, one good example is like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, or YMCA's, these franchises, right? They're all independently owned, but you've contracted now with an organization like that, and you have to do, let's say, hundreds of individual franchise contracts, right? With potentially different metrics or whatever you want in there, and different cost structures. Now I know that the world's going to the aggregator model, right? That's starting to bubble up, and I think that's a great model for us. I mean, there are tons of efficiency there, as well as reporting possibilities, right? They can report out on their network, and those things are all great. But it's really hard sometimes. You have to. I think, again, I hate to beat the dead horse here, but it's pre-work. It's working, being collaborative partners with your business, understanding the strategies, and making sure that you can actually operationalize what we're putting out there. I think that's the keys.
And one last thing, Michael, before we jump to the next one. Anna handed you on stage last year at the CMS Bid Bootcamp. This is in front of all the product leaders, a lot of new product folk, right? It was her key point was, as you're evaluating vendors that have anything to do with supplemental benefits or support the process around benefits, if they're making your life more difficult, especially as these reporting requirements start to ramp up and come out, there's going to be more, right? Your vendor has to have the SMEs and the visionary approach to plan ahead, to do a lot of like the Part C and Part D reporting requirements, for example. Or if you're an SDOH vendor, there's a ton of them. If you're not documenting that a member has a need, reported a need, and then mapping that to the LOINC code on the back end to of a resource that was provided, right? So if they had food insecurity, I provided this benefit to the member. CMS is requiring us to document that. If the vendor is just lobbing it over and giving you a standard file in their format and says good luck to a health plan that's already bogged down from an IT and capability standpoint, think as you're contracting or looking at different vendors, make sure that you've got a SME on your end that can ask the right questions to make sure that vendor's making your life easier, because they can really make it more difficult.
Great point. Well, now I want to move over to something that's really important with going on with a partnership. Jack, I know you shared prior when we were talking about VCs, really aligning with them, working with them, and kind of the insight that they can provide you with the vendor intel and insight. Can you share and elaborate more on that?
Yeah, I've just kind of made some connections with some venture capitalist firms. They're super willing to talk. If it was going to be one of those things where they were going to only pitch the people they have in their portfolio, right? Then that tells me that they're just really interested in kind of getting a contract and just driving forward their, getting some ROI on their investment, right? But what I've found actually is that more often than not, they're super willing to give me intel on vendors they've looked at and that are not in their portfolio or not under contract with them in any way. They are very, very objective about the data they provide. They are open and it's never like that. The good thing is I don't ever feel steered to a vendor, right? They're like, here it is. Do you want an intro? I'll get you an intro. And then they're out of it. They're not looking they don't get involved in the deals. They don't know anything about our strategy, right? I come to them and be like, hey, what have you seen in this space? Is there anything new out there? And they'll give me a couple names, or they won't give me any names. I mean, there's plenty of times where like, I don't have anything new in that. But if we talk about the pre-work from a sourcing standpoint, right? We talk about RFIs and RFQs and everything else. That's tons of time and resources that me and my team are working on looking at the market. But this kind of, it's not going to cut out all of the work, right? I mean, they're not going to give me every single vendor in a space or in a category or a service area. But what they do is they kind of get me thinking about things like what's important in the industry. What should your KPIs be, right? What question should you be asking potentially in an RFQ or RFP? And then, or just I'll be honest, there was one I was exposed to about 4 years ago. They're waiting on FDA approval still to this day, but their process and what they're proposing is not only an improvement in performance by a large margin in this specific industry, but also like a 40% rate reduction for the process. So it's like I'm just sitting here waiting for that FDA approval, and I'm gonna like flip the switch, let's go, because it's in a big quality measure type of area. And from what I know, there's only 2 vendors out there now that are even leveraging this new technology. I've been talking to them for 4 years. It may not even come to something. Again, it may just be education. But I think as a sourcing person, or you have to go out and find resources, right? Especially in the direct spend side. The Gartners and the Burrows and all, they're really, really solid on the indirect side. 3 bids at a buy, and their materials, and they can, if you're working very Anheuser-Busch, you can buy the barley and the hops and this and that for all the, whatever you want to, all the pricing's out there. It's all published. But when you're talking about services and innovation, it's really hard to get a beat on how to price something or how to look at, and so I think it's really important to do as much as you can, and just always be open to learn. I mean, that's one thing I push on my team always is like, have an open mind and learn. So the more you learn, the smarter you are, the more value you bring to the company, and the better that you can, the better your vendor selection process is going to be. So I think it's just another great insight. And I'm not saying that the Burrows and the Gartners are not good, because they're just used for different things. So again, that's also a great resource. VCs are a great resource. Internal people, who did they use in the past? I mean, they came from another plan. I mean, there's all kinds of things. You cannot discount or discredit any of them. So I think that's what's important.
Well, health plans in this environment need quick wins. So what's on your radar, Jack?
Well, one of the things I think from what I've seen in a variety of the companies that I've been in so far is there's a lot of growth, right, in health plans. I mean, there's either acquisitions, right? We've seen a ton of that, or there's a lot of organic growth, right? When you grow rapidly, I think what happens is you get into this plug and play mentality where you got to get someone in place. So you may not have all the necessary vendor performance and oversight type of mechanisms you need to measure how good a vendor is performing for you currently in order to scale them into potentially a different market that you win or a new acquisition that you make. Rather, the opposite is that you're just like, hey, let's just grab a new vendor and plug them in. So I think consolidation is a big, from our seat, consolidating vendors is a big focus right now. But do you consolidate just to consolidate, or do you consolidate to leverage good performance at a volume price, right? So, you lower your unit price because they're performing really well. So you give them more business. You don't just give them more business because it's easy to contract with them because they already have an MSA, you have all the foundational documents, they've done their InfoSec reviews, and you don't just be like, oh, well, they've already, without a mind at all to cost, market, performance, or anything. You just like, well, that's the easy one. Let's just plug them in, right? You don't do it that way. And then, you have, again, we talked about how disparate the industry is, especially in the Medicaid space. Maybe North Carolina says we have to use X vendor, Michigan says we have to use this vendor, and California says we have to use this vendor, all for the same service. Well, your hands are kind of tied on those, right? In those cases. But I think we almost employ that sometimes. We're like, hey, let's just grab these vendors and plug them in. So I think consolidation is something that we're looking at quite a bit as we grow. I say we as, the indiscriminate we, but it's a necessary evil, right? I mean, you want to be able to compare. I just had this discussion the other day with an associate, right? It said, I'm not about having 6 vendors in the same space doing the same thing. 2 makes sense. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket unless you know that they're a really solid vendor, a really solid partner, right? So if you kind of have some hesitations, maybe you should have 2. You have a backup, right? But then that also allows you to compare them against each other, right? And I think that's a really important metric as well, because it shows. The funny thing is, I don't want to get off on a tangent too much here, but it shows like those 2 vendors are working in the same space with the same membership, with the same population, with all the factors are almost all consistent. Whereas versus a vendor over here and a vendor over here that, maybe one's in DSNP and one's in Medicare. Well, they might not have the same outcomes, right? So you kind of have to almost rationalize as much as possible and get it down to, I tell this to vendors all the time. I'm like, what does your data say about engagement stats, for example, for, they come at me with proposals, right? And be like, oh, I can get the 50% engagement rate, right? And I'm like, all right, well, is that, I mean, what's your client population? Like, oh, we're 50% commercial, we're 25% Medicaid, and we're 25% Medicare. I'm like, okay, well, what's your engagement rate for Medicaid? And they're like, oh, well, I don't know, we don't have that data, right? And I'm like, well, we're gonna be contracting with you for like 90% Medicaid. I need to know what that engagement rate is for Medicaid, because everyone knows that the commercial rates bump everything up, so they can float you all kinds of data, but if you don't have it parsed out, and again, this is probably a tangent to your question here, but if you don't have it parsed out, you can't make a good decision. I mean, or the best decision for your company. Total tangent.
Well, man, this has been great. We're kind of wrapping it up. Tom, is there anything else you want to say until we have one more question? Just want to make sure we're covering the bases.
Yeah, Tom, I'll let you talk.
No. It's been an even split today. I think, Jack, it's been great. I think just back to the theme and title of this is, it is really challenging to find the right internal champions at a health plan, and also to find the right vendors that can meet your needs in a trusted way. It's a real challenge. So cherish it when you find it, and do your best to put your best foot forward. And it's all built on trust. I mean, it really is. Long-term relationships, as frequently as business development folks transition from one role to the next, the health plan folks are doing it just the same. And you can't burn bridges in this space. So finding the right partners is difficult, and cherish it.
And so we're landing the plane soon, or the spaceship, and we're at the last question. It's been a great time. How else can payers and strategic vendor partners do more together to impact the lives of their members? So it's all about really making better, improving life. So let's missionally, let's share how we can do that, guys.
High level, just focus on the member, right? I can't tell you how many folks I've been talking to on the plan side as well as on the vendor side that have been recently burnt out around chasing quality gaps, just chasing a number, and forgetting that on the other line, at the end of that line where that member number sits is someone who's facing real challenges. So if you can keep the member, a member-centric point of view and a member vision in everything you do, I think it'll in the end be fruitful for everyone. And that's challenging. It's hard to do. So that's what I'd leave us at.
Yeah, I actually will reiterate that same thought. I mean, I do tell my team that quite a bit, right? We are disconnected from the member in where we sit, right, in sourcing. But if we always keep the member in mind, like always approach that maybe your mom or your grandmother is serviced by this, or your aunt or uncle, right? And kind of make it a much more personal approach. I think at that point you gain you gain a it's like putting yourself in other people's shoes kind of thing, right? And just kind of be open to different ideas and open to how you drive performance, and don't get bogged down in the numbers as much. I mean, you always have to worry about that. It's like almost something you don't even have to talk about. You don't have to talk about the numbers because they're always there. Nobody's going to go and spend $500 on an in-home assessment. It's just not feasible. It's not within market rates. But I think sometimes you can give up a little bit of price in exchange for really good quality performance in the long run. Because that's exponential revenue in my mind. That's long-term partnerships. That's reducing your costs. There's so many factors in there that to quantify beyond a rate cut that have to be considered. So I think that's kind of, if we keep that in mind, I think that's important too.
Well, this has been great today to have Tom, offering the vendor perspective, with Jack offering the payer perspective on Bring a Friend series, empowered, I guess, by Planetary Health First, Mars Next. It's been really phenomenal. I hope everyone's enjoyed this conversation. Really appreciate you coming on, Tom and Jack.
Thanks for having me, Mike.